There is nothing so wonderful in the world as telling stories.
Tous les matins, on essaye de traverser le miroir et de regarder le monde différemment.
It is true, I am a woman. Une fois que ce saut est fait, tout devient possible.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Casiraghi. Welcome to the podcast of Les Rendezvous littéraires Rue Cambon, a place where we meet to talk about writing, to talk about books. Let's meet women writers who have just taken their first step, the most decisive, the most difficult in the world of literature. How did their vocation call to them? What are their writing rituals? Who reads them and what do they read?
I'm Erica Wagner, and it's my pleasure to introduce Kaliane Bradley and welcome her to Chanel's podcast, Les Rencontres. I'm thrilled by this opportunity to discuss Kaliane's debut novel, The Ministry of Time, set to be one of the biggest books of 2024. It has already sold in 26 territories across the globe, and screen rights were optioned in a 21-way auction by the BBC. The television adaptation will be crafted by Alice Birch, the screenwriter behind Normal People, Conversations with Friends, both adapted from Sally Rooney's novels, and The Wonder, adapted from a book by Emma Donoghue. Set in the near future, The Ministry of Time is narrated by a civil servant, we never learn her name, who signs on with a mysterious government ministry to test the limits of their new discovery, the possibility of time travel. Men and women from history are sucked forward into the novel's present, where they are referred to as expats, hinting at the book's colonial themes. The narrator's role is to work as a bridge, helping the expat, known as 1847, to acclimate to his new surroundings. 1847 is in fact Commander Graham Gore. As far as history is concerned, Gore died on Sir John Franklin's doomed expedition to the Arctic. In part, The Ministry of Time is a comedy of manners, as our narrator explains telephones and washing machines to her charge. In part, it's an exploration of what it means to belong to a place, to a time, and who gets to take possession of a narrative. It's a love story, it's an adventure story, it's a mystery. In short, it's fantastic, and I don't want to give too much more away about it, so you have the pleasure of discovery yourself. Eleanor Catton, author of Birnam Wood, called it an outrageously brilliant debut, and she's right on the money. Kaliane lives in London, where she is an editor at Penguin Classics. Previously, she worked at Granta Books, and she has also worked as a bookseller, so she knows the business inside out. Her short stories have appeared in Catapult, the Willow Herb Review, Extra Teeth, Electric Literature, and Some Such Stories, among others. Her essay, The Wishing Dance, appeared in Gifts of Gravity and Light, published by Hodder and Stoughton in 2021. In 2022, she was the winner of the Harper's Bazaar Short Story Prize, Confession, I was one of the judges, and also of the V.S. Pritchett Short Story Prize. I'm so delighted to be speaking to her today on Les Rencontres. Welcome, Kaliane.
Thank you, Erica. That was it was so nice to hear you talk about the book in that way, and also every time someone says the name Graham Gore, even now, I just start smiling enormously.
Excellent. I am very glad he stayed with you, even after the book has been completed. So in the first part of our conversation, I want to talk first about your beginnings as a writer. So were you a big reader growing up? Were books a big part of your childhood and youth?
Absolutely. I was a very, very intense and almost indiscriminate reader, actually. My mother is very proud of my achievement in writing a book, sometimes gently tries to take some credit for it. She says that because I have younger twin sisters, so they're 2 years younger than me. So when I was 2 years old, my mother was looking after twin babies. And she said the easiest way to settle me down while she was looking after them was to put me in the middle of a living room and surround me with books. And apparently I would sit there very happily picking up books, looking at them, putting them down again. And she credits that mothering moment for the reason that I read so much. But I grew up at the beginning of the internet years, so we didn't have internet in the house until I was 16, which means that everything that I wanted to, if I wanted to find any information or if I wanted to imagine anything anew, it was a case of going to books. And I was a big fan of my local library. Still am a big fan of my local library, but my local library really shaped my reading taste.
Do you remember the first story, poem, anything that you wrote?
I do have a very clear memory of, you can make little zines out of an A4 piece of paper. You can fold it and then you have 8 tiny little pages. And I think I wrote a story about a cat. I like cats very much. I wrote a little story about the Queen of Cats. And then I ended up making this tiny little series. And my dad made me a bookshelf to keep these little zines in out of a cereal box. My proudest creative moment, second only to the Ministry of Time.
But that's how writers often begin. If you go to the parsonage, the Brontes' house in Yorkshire, there are those little miniature books that they made. So you're part of a great tradition.
A great zine tradition stretching back to the 19th century.
All the way to the Brontes in the 19th century. Speaking of the 19th century, I have done my best to describe the Ministry of Time, but it's such a unique book. Can you talk about the sources of your inspiration? They're so particular and so special.
Absolutely. So during lockdown, I started watching a TV series called The Terror, which is based on Dan Simmons' book, The Terror, which is about Sir John Franklin's lost 1845 expedition to the Arctic. I talk about this as if everyone is very familiar with it, but just in case any listeners aren't, Franklin's expedition sent 2 ships and 129 men to the Arctic to discover the Northwest Passage, which would have linked the UK to the trading kingdoms of Asia had they found it. And they just vanished. They were last seen by Europeans in July 1845, I think it was, and subsequently never since. And this immediately fascinated me. The hubris of it, the stupidity, the bravery, the tragedy. So I was fascinated by this TV series, but it was also lockdown. I did have, spaghetti for a brain. So I did have to check just online that what I thought I'd seen was actually what I'd seen, because the episodes of this TV series is beautiful. It's a really emotional, subtle, gorgeously written TV series, but there are 66 characters, most of whom are white men with mutton chops bundled up against the cold. So it was sometimes difficult to tell them apart. So I checked a fan wiki, in fact, for the first episode, and at the bottom of the fan wiki was a bloopers list. And I ran across the name Graham Gore. I hadn't noticed Graham Gore in the TV series. He's not a big character in it. He's not a big character in Polar Exploration. But I thought, that's an interesting name. I'm not doing anything. It's lockdown. I'm just on my sofa. I'm going to look this man up. Got to his Wikipedia page, and it's one of those moments that, where the world changes for you. The world really changed for me. I saw the daguerreotype of him, the photograph. He struck me as looking like a very quietly confident, slightly amused man. I thought he was very handsome. And then his biography made him sound as if, indeed, everyone who'd ever sailed with him found him calm, competent, sweet-tempered, incredibly good at his job. And I thought, God, this guy sounds wonderful. I bet he'd be great in a pandemic. Because I wanted to find out more about him, I wanted to find out more about this expedition, which I'd become very, very invested in. I went online, which was the only thing I could do in a lockdown, and I started searching for more information about him and about the Franklin expedition, and I found a community of polar exploration enthusiasts, not just for the Franklin expedition, for a number of polar expeditions, but they were so generous, they were so open and so welcoming. When I turned up and said, I'm interested in this one random guy that no one else cares about, but I do, that I started writing the first version of the Ministry of Time for them as a joke, really, a literary parlour game. What would it be like if your favourite polar explorer lived in your house?
The fact of you being drawn to Graham Gore in this way perhaps is what led you to pulling him into the narrator's present. I wonder if there are other sources of inspiration. Your book has been compared to Audrey Niffenegger's The Time Traveler's Wife. I thought a little bit of Emily St. John Mandel's The Sea of Tranquility. And I wonder what other inspirations you've had, not necessarily to do with time travel, but what kept you going other than the specific story of Graham Gore and Sir John Franklin.
Well, coincidentally, I think two time travel stories did influence me in some way. One is Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful, very funny, very tragic novel. And it's fascinating because time travel in it, although the man who comes unstuck in time, as Vonnegut puts it, he travels to various parts of his life and experiences his life in a non-linear way. While he describes this as time travel, it can also very easily be read as PTSD, as a man who is deeply traumatized, reliving different parts of his life. So time travel as trauma, that was really fascinating to me. I read a great deal of Arctic journals, inevitably, while I was researching the Graham Gore segments, and the way that the men on these expeditions talked about their experiences of loneliness, of hope, of community really impacted the way that I wrote. Certainly the scenes with the expats all together, as well as the scenes of Graham Gore in the Arctic. I will also admit, I think I was subconsciously influenced by Austin Powers.
Love that. Excellent source of inspiration.
It's about a man who in his own time was the ultimate agent of his government, appropriate, attractive, fascinating. Admittedly, he is not pulled through time, he is frozen, but then he wakes up in the future to discover that his cultural touchstones, his attitudes are now considered out of date. And he has to team up with a female agent to help him get used to the new century. And it is increasingly obvious to me, because I watched that when I was very young, I think that's left a lasting influence.
Very good. We like all kinds of inspiration here. I'd also like to ask you about the publication process for the Ministry of Time. Now, you yourself, as I said, you worked as a bookseller. You're now an editor. So in a sense, you know the business better, perhaps, than some other writers. But still, I wonder, the publication of a first novel is always an extraordinary experience. What happened? How did you find an agent, and how did it get out into the world?
So when I was writing this novel for these friends from what I refer to as polar exploration online, I was also trying to write another serious novel about Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge, which I have since put to one side. But they told me that this thing I was writing, that I thought was just a kind of joke between us, it only had about 15 readers in the end. It could be a real novel. It was worth sending out to literary agents. Because I do work in publishing, I sent the novel out under a pseudonym, because I didn't want to force people who are my friends to feel like they had to read it, and I didn't want to take advantage of my position in the industry. So I sent it out under a pseudonym, and 3 different agents were interested in it. I emailed them under the pseudonym, then they met me in person. Oh, it's you. Okay, fine. And the agent I chose, Chris Wellbeloved at Aitken Alexander, has actually known me for a very long time and has been very supportive of my writing for a very long time. He's read all of my short stories, I think, that I've been publishing over the years, and has often asked me, are you working on a novel? I'd be interested to see anything you were working on. So I felt like he was the perfect choice, really. So we worked on it for just over a year. And this was startling to me because I'd written the first version in 12 weeks, of course, because it was a game. It was fun. I was doing, weekly updates with these friends. And when it was picked up by an agent, I thought, great, I'm a genius. This doesn't need work. Of course it needed work. It needed so much work. So just over a year of rewrites. I think we sent out the 6th draft in the end to editors just in the UK. And incredibly, unexpectedly, I was not expecting this at all. After 6 drafts, I was feeling my expectations were careful, because I'd had to work on it so much. It was amazingly preempted within 48 hours by Federico Antonino at Sceptre. Just my mind blown. Again, it felt like the moment that I saw Graham's picture on Wikipedia, getting that phone call. I could feel the magnetic north of my world realigning. what an incredible experience.
But it's wonderful to hear, too, how collaborative writing can be. I think it's often, of course, it is solitary. You have to spend all those hours at your desk, but there does come a point where to have a reader, and often now it will be an agent, a good agent, who will work with you. But I can understand why after 6 drafts, you might think, I've come to the end of my rope.
I've come to the end of my rope. I love these characters so much, but surely no one else could love them as much as me. I've spent so much time with them. I was also getting increasingly frustrated with the narrator, because the narrator is a very flawed person who makes some decisions that hurt other people. And, you know, she has to do that because she's on a journey. But it did mean I had to spend time with this person that I wanted to strangle.
Well, I know that readers will love these characters as much as you did. Now, can we hear just the opening of the Ministry of Time?
Absolutely. So the Ministry of Time is mostly told through the point of view of the narrator, the bridge in the 21st century, doing her job and watching Graham Gore. But these chapters are interspersed with very short sections that are set in the Arctic in the 1840s, and they are from the point of view of Graham Gore. So it opens with Graham. Perhaps he'll die this time. He finds this doesn't worry him. Maybe because he's so cold he has a drunkard's grip on his mind. When thoughts come, they're translucent, free-swimming medusae. As the Arctic wind bites at his hands and feet, his thoughts slop against his skull. They'll be the last thing to freeze over. He knows he is walking, though he can no longer feel it. The ice in front of him bounces and retreats, so he must be moving forward. He has a gun across his back, a bag across his front. Their weight is both meaningless and Sisyphean. He is in a good mood. If his lips were not beyond sensation, he would whistle. In the distance, he hears the boom of cannon fire. 3 in a row, like a sneeze. The ship is signalling.
Thank you so much. So I want to ask you a little bit more about the process of making this book and the choices that you made. I mentioned in my introduction that we never learn the narrator's name. So I'd like to ask you not just about that, but the role of naming in this book, why it was important to you that we don't know her name, and how the other characters' names function.
The narrator is unnamed because she is telling the story as if she is the centre of the universe, basically. And she doesn't need to name herself to herself. So she never admits what her name is, although I had a name in mind. I had a name for her and a name for her sister. The people that she studies very intensely and thinks of, I suppose you could say 360 degrees in the round, are given full names. So these are the expats: Graham Gore, Arthur Reginald Smythe, Margaret Kemble, Thomas Cardingham, Anne Spencer. These are people that she studies and thinks about constantly, so full names. At the next level, a sort of circle out, are people who she thinks of as characters in her story, functionally. People who are real and interesting to her, but maybe she doesn't think about their whole emotional realities and she doesn't think about their entire experiences. So these are characters like Somalia, who's another bridge, Quentin, who is her handler, Adela, who is the vice secretary of the ministry. And the fact that she doesn't think about these people in a fully realised way does mean she misses certain things about what's happening for them in their own narratives, in their own stories, and that causes her to make some difficult and, I think, wrong decisions. And then the final circle further out are people that she doesn't even think of by name. She thinks of them as institutions. So the secretary of the ministry, she just calls the secretary. There's a character called the brigadier, who she simply thinks of as his function as a brigadier. In many ways, she also only refers to her sister as my sister, because she doesn't think of her sister as a person so much as a part of her. But as I say, I did have names in mind for them. It's just that the way that she sees the world meant that I had to name these people in this way.
I think that's very revealing of the careful way that a writer has to think about every aspect of what they're constructing. And without giving anything away about this marvelous book, it has a very intricate structure. It comes together in a particular way at the end, wonderful and thrilling. What were the challenges of putting together something like this? Did you know where you were going? Are you a planner? Do you just figure it out as you go? How do you write?
For Ministry, because the very first version, I had a very, very clear idea of what I wanted the emotional impact to be, the particular emotional beats that Graham and his bridge hit. So the ending is almost unchanged from the very first draft. There are certain altercation scenes or key turning points that, again, are almost unchanged from the first draft because I knew what emotional beats I wanted them to hit. More complicated was establishing the role of the Ministry, because I was very, very interested in character interaction, in personhood, in personal experiences of bureaucracy, of trauma, of love. But actually writing the structure of the Ministry was quite difficult. And in the first draft, this was easy. I just said, well, there's a Ministry. Don't worry about it. Here it is. It's a bit sinister. But you can't do that to a reader who is not one of your friends and who is just going to give you a little bit of slack. So building out the universe of the Ministry and building out the expat experiment was quite challenging. And also getting the balance between the narrator's limited field of vision and what might appear to be an author's limited field of vision, right? Because she essentially has her viewpoint on her like a helmet, like blinkers. It completely blinkers her to some other people's lives and stories. But it is very easy to fall into the trap of underwriting characters who should be more fleshed out. So again, that was a challenge.
You mentioned that you put aside another book that you were writing that was connected to the history of Cambodia and the Khmer Rouge, and you share with your narrator Anglo-Cambodian heritage. How did that influence the writing of this novel, having put another novel aside?
I can't truly say I've put this novel aside because I ripped a character from it to put it into the Ministry of Time. So the very first version of the Ministry of Time, which was under a different and terrible name, had a narrator who was a cipher. She wasn't anything. Her ethnicity wasn't specific. Even her sense of self wasn't specific. The whole thing was written in second person. She was sort of a reader proxy, in fact. So she had to be passive and faceless. But this doesn't really work. If you're writing a book about falling in love, very personal experience. If you're writing a book about complicity, also a very personal experience, you need to have a believable and fully realized character. In the other book that I was writing, one of the characters is a member of the Cambodian diaspora. There were a much broader cast of characters from the Cambodian diaspora in that book. She is also mixed race, white passing. She was an academic in the original novel. And she had a conflicting and ambiguous relationship with power, with her own power and with power that's exerted over her, with power structures. And she was quite wry and a little bit difficult. And I thought, God, she would be really handy, actually. If I could just rip her out and put her into this novel, that would be great. That would make my life a lot easier.
What does your writing day look like? Do you have practices? Do you have rituals that help you? How does it work?
I have sometimes seen, as I walk along the street, people walking their dogs. And sometimes the dog wants to just sit down, have a sniff, doesn't want to do any more walking. Or even more intensely, when you see someone walking a cat on a harness. And cats will just do whatever they want. They'll wander off, they'll sit down, they'll lie on their side. You can't stop them. And sometimes I feel like I am both the person trying to drag the pet along, like, please come along, and I feel like I'm the pet. So my writing process very much forcing myself to write. I do have a full-time job. So during the day, I am working on that because I'm not a morning person and I wish I was. I think morning people are somehow morally superior and I'm convinced that their writing is better from draft one because of it. Because I'm not a morning person, I don't write in the morning. So I get up very late, I go to work, I'm just about on time. After work, I will often procrastinate because I'm tired from the working day and I don't want to look at the screen anymore. So I'll talk to my fiancé or I'll wander around and look at the different madly painted walls in our house. Or I'll stand in the garden and stare at the birds. It does feel like I've taken myself by the scruff of the neck, dragged myself up to the office and sat myself down in front of a computer, in front of a document. And it's funny, as soon as I actually start, the reluctance melts away and I'm so happy to be there. I have to completely give myself to the novel or to whatever I'm writing. I have to spend completely uninterrupted and undistracted time with it. So usually about an hour and a half. No getting up to make a cup of tea, no going on the internet, nothing. It has to just be me and the novel. And then I come to the end of that time. I feel a great sense of well-being and peace. I read through what I've written. I think, oh no, oh God. And then I go to bed.
You have to find that space, completely alone with your novel. But of course, your job in particular is looking critically at other kinds of writing because you are an editor. Are there ways in which this helps you? Are there ways in which it hinders you? How do you set that editor person on the other side of your door, perhaps?
It's sometimes quite difficult. I think it would be more difficult if I still worked with contemporary fiction, which is what I did at Granta. Fortunately, at Penguin Press, I work on non-fiction and I work on classic fiction. So it's a slightly different brain space that I have to be in. I will say that working professionally as an editor has given me a structure for the way I edit, which has been very helpful. Certainly when I was still an assistant and I was trying to write, I was much more chaotic about the way I would approach a text that I'd written. Working as an editor has given me, I think, quite pragmatically just structural tools for dealing with a text. But I also think that it has made me feel much more open to the sense of being in conversation with other texts. And I love the idea that I might be editing someone who might then go on to read my work, or someone would read something I'd edited and then read something I'd written and feel like there was some kind of thematic or emotional link. I really appreciate being deeply immersed in other people's texts because I think it just enriches the way I think about writing. Even if it's not changing my style or changing the way I structure, it is enriching the experience.
It gives you a kind of scope of thinking.
Absolutely.
In the final section of our conversation, I'd like to ask you about the reception of this book as it goes out into the world. Even before its publication, the book was a wild success. Booksellers were championing it. As I said, there was an auction for the television rights. How does that feel? Are there downsides to that? How was that for you?
It's been so completely extraordinary and surreal because I started with about 5 readers, which rose to about 15 readers. And I thought, oh, I've tripled my readership. This is amazing. I cannot imagine such stardom. Now I think it has been read by more than 15 people. And even trying to conceive of that, because 15 people, I can imagine, like I've met them at this stage. I've met most of them. And I can imagine their faces as they react to different parts of the book. And I feel like I know them. The book going out into the wide world does feel like this kind of shadow version of myself who, I put out a version of myself to interact with the kind of platonic idea of the author and the platonic idea of the reader. And sometimes there can be a bit of friction between the person you are, who was just some guy who wants to sit at home eating chocolate biscuits and avoiding doing her writing, and the person who is the author. And I feel like the author is someone who, I hope she's doing well. She is me, but sometimes I feel like she's separate. Yeah, she's over there. She's doing something else. So that's been wonderful and surreal. And it's really brought home to me as well how brilliant my publishing teams are, because there's no way that a book receives this kind of reception or receives this kind of attention just because an author wrote a book. That never happens. A lot of it is luck, of course. Luck plays an enormous role in publishing. If it didn't, we'd produce bestsellers every single time. But also the hard work, the creativity, the intelligence, the belief of a publishing team, of the marketing team, the sales team, the editors, the agents, the publicists. It's really been a thrill to be on the other side of that and to see them at work.
Is there a particular reaction that's meant something extra special to you, either from a family member or perhaps this early group of readers, seeing it now have the success that it is, I wonder if there's something that's been especially meaningful.
There was a very beautiful and moving moment when I was in the US as part of a US tour. And my editor said, "Oh, a bookseller sent me this package for you. Here it is." So I opened it, and a bookseller at Dog-Eared Books in Iowa, had crocheted me a chicken. To explain, the narrator of the book gets a bag in the shape of a chicken, which she's very, very fond of, and she is subsequently given a necklace in the shape of a chicken. And so this bookseller had crocheted me a chicken and said, "I loved your book. I know we don't know each other. I know that we have completely different backgrounds and we are completely different people, but I really felt like this book had been written for me." And I thought, you know what? It probably was. I think it was. Just because I don't know you, it doesn't mean it wasn't written for you, especially if you've crocheted a chicken.
As a reader, it's always one of the most striking things to me that the books that can seem, I want to say, the most unusual, the most specific, perhaps eccentric, also speak in a deeply personal way to so many people as a reader. Maybe the chicken crochet is the answer to this question too. I was going to ask how you consider your achievement now and if there was something particularly unexpected about it. Again, because you know about publishing. Is there something that really surprised you in all of this?
One thing that did surprise me is that I feel like I told myself intellectually, I know this is going to feel weird, wonderful and weird. I know that this will feel beautiful and surreal, but also slightly deranging. And I understood that intellectually, but I don't think I really knew how it would feel until I started experiencing it. And it made me think, oh, all the authors I've ever worked with, I'm so sorry I didn't take into account just how deranging this is. They were all so professional. They're all so brilliant. They're all doing so well. I should take a leaf out of their book. So there's that. There's also, because I spent so long with these characters in the drafts, I couldn't really imagine how they would be received by other people, and the warmth and the kindness and the people telling me who their favourite characters are. You know, people coming up to me and saying, "I love Arthur, I love Maggie." It's just enthralling. It's one of the best feelings I've ever had.
That's really lovely to hear. As I noted in my introduction, this is a book that also addresses the European colonial project in a really fascinating and original way. Gore is a man of his time, the 19th century, with those attitudes, and they bump up against different attitudes in the 21st century, in the present. How do you think fiction can help shape our attitudes to the past and inform the future?
I think that fiction gives you a lot of leeway to think broadly and creatively and imaginatively. And I know those words sound just like buzzwords, but it really is something to be able to conjure a world almost out of smoke and to imagine a body, a human, a family, a community moving through it. For example, you know, I'm not a Victorian, but I spent so much time reading Victorian literature that I feel like I understood Graham Gore in a way I might not have done if I'd only read factual accounts of the Victorian era or of Arctic exploration, because as well as understanding the material reality, I wanted to understand the imaginative reality that he lived in. So I think fiction gives us this opportunity to expand an imaginative reality, occupy that, and then draw back from it and consider it. I also think that the way you tell a story can be a way of approaching issues that might feel gnarly or prickly to deal with just as dry fact. So my preferred mode of delivery is humorous. Not always silly humour, but humour, dark humour, dry humour, sometimes silly humour. I think humour is a very powerful tool for delivering difficult ideas. Terry Pratchett once said that humour can get in under the door when a door is locked. But I think there are other ways of delivering ideas through anger, through surprise, through mystery, all of which are brilliant and each have their place, and I think each author really finds their voice and decides how to do this. For me, it's humour.
And that perhaps too is the Austin Powers influence.
Absolutely.
Again. At the end of our Les Rencontres podcast, we always have a few questions that we ask all of our authors, our guests. So here they come. The first one is, what is the most surprising thing you've learned from being a writer?
I know we often say writing is a lonely experience, but I found almost the opposite. Writing has been an immensely collaborative experience, and I feel like it has brought me to communities that I didn't have before, particularly the polar exploration enthusiasts, but it has brought me to readers who I wouldn't have met before. It has really expanded my horizons, and I really like that, to have gone from tapping away in front of a computer to discovering that the point of writing is, of course, to communicate, is, of course, to reach out across a table or reach out of a book to someone else. And again, I knew this intellectually, but until it happened, I don't think it had really sunk in. So that's been wonderful.
Sticking with the theme of surprise, what would people be surprised to learn about you?
I think they might be surprised to learn that I'm very, very into ballet. And I did, when I was a young person and as a teenager and a child, I did a lot of ballet. I continue to be extremely interested in ballet. In an alternative universe, perhaps I would have been a ballet dancer, but instead I've become a writer.
Very good. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Oh, perfect happiness is a day when the writing goes well and it finishes early enough that my fiancé and I can go out to see our friends.
Lovely. What advice would you give to anyone who wants to express their creativity?
Only write the fun parts. I know that sounds like it might be a cop-out, but it's not, I promise you. Only writing the fun parts, only writing the bits that you are absolutely sure you want to write will often give you the skeleton or the scaffolding for the rest of the writing. So only write the fun parts.
I love that. I'm going to remember that for myself, I have to say. In one word, how would you like to be remembered as a writer?
I'm going to say funny. And I'm choosing the word funny because I think it can mean a number of different things. I don't think it means unserious. I don't think it means silly. And I don't think it means light. But I do think it means someone who had the ability to move you enough that you laughed. And true laughter is a gut response. It has to be something that truly moved us and truly sometimes made us flinch or made us smile. So funny.
Humour is real connection. I agree with you. And finally, what would you like your second novel to look like?
I have started writing it. I've got about 35,000 words so far. 35,000 unedited words, which means I'm going to end up with about 19 of those 19,000 words. It is partly set in a lighthouse in the land of the dead, as per the story that won the V.S. Pritchett, and is partly set in contemporary London. Realistically, I know that this kind of thing can't possibly happen again. I don't think the publication experience of Ministry would ever happen again. I can't do Ministry again, and I don't think it would be fair to a reader to try and give them Ministry light the second time round. So what would I want it to look like? Something different, something new.
Thank you so much, Kaliane Bradley, for joining us on our podcast, Les Rencontres. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we have the chance to talk again soon, and I can't wait to read that next book.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Rendezvous littéraires Rue Cambon podcast. To discover more about it, you will find images, links, and references on the Chanel website. À bientôt!